The initiative to call the rules as written began with the NCAA Rules Subcommittee. Their concern is that the game has just become way too physical. Let me get the slideshow up, and we're going to go in and out of this. You haven't missed much. As I said, the Rules Committee was getting concerned that the game was just getting way too physical. Play at the center is too physical, especially when the ball is on the perimeter. The play on the perimeter is too static, with the offense unable to move and officials hesitant to call fouls just outside 5 meters between the posts for fear of creating instant offense. Play during the transition, particularly at the former center position, is too physical. The grabbing, the holding, the kicking off, all of that stuff. Bad offense or a bad pass has been used as a reason not to call fouls that are just too physical. And the burden really hasn't been sufficiently placed on the defense to show that they are not fouling. And I think there's been a lot of concern, not just at the collegiate level, but even at the high school level, that the game is getting a little too crazy. It's getting too physical. It's become a vertical game. There's not a lot of movement out there. And so this group, along with the officials in the San Joaquin section of the CIF, the Stockton, Sacramento, Merced area, and the guys down in Visalia, are all going to implement this initiative to call the rules as written. These are not new rules. They're the same rules, but they're going to be called as written. As the game has gotten uglier, there's been a lot of debate about it. Well, is it the rules that are wrong? Maybe we need to change the rules. It's kind of hard to know if people don't call them the way they're written to begin with. You don't know whether the rules are any good. So if you start calling the game as the rules were written, and that reveals problems, then it's time to change the rules. But the general feeling at the NCAA level, and I think it's shared by many at the high school level, is that the problem is probably not really so much in the rules, but the way the rules have been interpreted. That's a result of our exposure to the international game. Our top referees go abroad and they see the way the game's played over there. They call it that way, they bring it home, and it filters all the way down to the high school level. This initiative is being carefully watched by FINA. The vice chairman of the FINA Technical Water Polo Committee is a fellow by the name of Mark Koganov. Mark lives in New York. He's originally from Azerbaijan, so in the eyes of FINA, he's an Azerbaijani, but he's one of the top referees in the world. He's done at least 2 gold medal championship games at the World Championships. He's also an NCAA referee. And you'll see him doing the big games at tournaments like MPSF championships and at the national championships. And through him, the FINA Technical Committee is well aware of what we're doing with this initiative here in the United States. And they felt a need to clean their game up too. And they're going to take a look at how this works out, and they're going to make adjustments accordingly. Let me show you a real good example of how bad pass is used as an excuse not to call a physical foul. Nothing called, absolutely nothing. Presumably because it was felt to be a bad pass. But if you look at it again, how do you know whether it was a bad pass? How do you know that that offensive player, had he not been buried, would not have been able to get to the ball a little bit ahead of the goalie and do something with it, get his shot off? Coach wants to yell it's a bad pass when that kick out or penalty gets called. Well, we'll never really know because of that foul. Okay? So that is a prime example of the kind of thing that this effort is trying to address. So where do we want to go? This, by the way, is an 8-slide summary of a whole day's worth of instruction at the NCAA referee school that was held about 10 days ago, a week ago Saturday. We'll want to promote athleticism over physicality, a game with more movement and less wrestling, and a game that's fun to watch, play, coach, and referee. John and Troy Barnhart did a scrimmage Wednesday night last week at Sunnyside. It was an inter-squad thing within Fresno Pacific University. Now it's an inter-squad scrimmage. It doesn't count toward anything. I'm sure it was much more politely played than a real game between two teams that are going at it would be played. Nonetheless, they did a good job of calling it consistent with this initiative. And Brian Sahovia had been working with his guys for quite some time to get them to stop grabbing when people drive, but instead to swim with them, and not to be so heavy in the center, but to use your legs to play defense and to get position without grabbing, pulling, sinking, and all of that stuff. And his kids had responded pretty well to that. It really looked like old-time water polo in a sense. Water polo from back in the early 90s or the 1980s. And I talked to Brian after the game, and he said, you know, that was really a lot more enjoyable for me to coach because I found I didn't have to spend much time yelling at my players, telling them where they should go, because they were being allowed, if they made an effort, to go where they needed to go. And in the past, I'd yell at them out of frustration because they're being held and they can't go where they want to go. So it can work well. It can make the game look pretty darn nice. Play at the center. You expect competition for position at the center, just as always, but you expect the players to do it without grabbing, holding, and sinking each other, okay? Make the defense show that they are not fouling as they jockey for position at the center while the ball's out on the perimeter. Call a contra when necessary. If the offense does something inappropriate, make that call. The lockup. The lockup is an acceptable strategy until someone in the lockup tries to move. If somebody tries to move, they're presumably going to let go to try to move, and movement is not allowed, then an exclusion, if it's the defender, or a contra, if it's the offensive player, should be called, okay? Anybody know the history of the lockup? How this thing came to happen? Okay, I'm old, so I know this. In 1996, prior to 1996, the rule was that free throws were taken wherever the foul occurred. So if you had a center and a center defender banging on each other in front of the goal while the ball was out on the perimeter or back in the backcourt and the offense was still working its way down to set up, you could call a simple, ordinary positioning foul, most of the time against the defender. That would force them to get off of each other. The ball came down to the center to be put into play to take the free throw. And in the meantime, if the offense was still coming down to set up, the clocks weren't running, that gave the offense some time, some extra time to come down and set up. And it was very easy to control physicality at the center with a simple, ordinary foul for positioning. In 1996, they changed the rule on where free throws are taken. They said that free throws would be taken at the point of the foul or wherever the ball is if the ball is farther back. And the only time when the ball would have to be moved is if it was in deeper than the point of the foul. You'd have to bring it back out to that line and then take it. So we figured out quickly that if we called those simple little positioning fouls under those rules, it just screwed things up because a free throw is still going to be taken back there where the ball is. Okay? And so calling that simple positioning foul just disrupted the flow of the game. It confused the offense. Nobody quite knew what was being called. So they stopped calling them. And in fact, for a while, there was explicit instruction in the clinics not to call those fouls. And to this day, you don't see ordinary fouls called during the struggle for position at the center. Okay? You just don't see it. So what was the next thing that happened? Well, the center defenders, knowing that those calls are not going to be made, started taking liberties. They started leaning on the centers. Pretty soon the centers supporting not only their own weight, but that of the defender, or at least a substantial fraction of that weight. Then we'll just hold a little bit, you know, and it just got grosser and grosser. So what's the next step? The offensive players, when they're sitting back to belly, it's really pretty hard to defend yourself against that. So what did they do? They turned around where they could control their defender until the ball was ready for entry. And that took the weight off of them of all this other stuff that wasn't getting called anymore. Okay? And that's how the lockup started. Actually, is a tactic that was initiated by centers to protect themselves from all this hanging on and messing around that center defenders were doing. If we do this, if we clamp down, particularly on the defense, on this kind of activity, there's not going to be as great a need for the centers to lock up. And I think eventually you're going to see less of it. Probably not right away, probably not much this year, at least at the start of the year. But I think the potential is there to see less of it, okay? So, again, the lockup is acceptable unless someone tries to move. And if someone tries to move, you got to give the other person normal reaction time to let go and play defense with their legs. But if they don't, then you make the appropriate call. Brandon.
If you have a lockup, and then now, say I'm in the front, and now the defender tries to move, what is an acceptable offensive strategy to still maintain my position but not hold? Just to turn and try and control that water?
There's no foul in turning.
And then, or even hands flat but not holding?
Yeah. There's been a lot of discussion about what constitutes a hold. Is this okay, but this isn't, and so on and so forth. It really comes down to whether you are hindering the ability of your opponent to move. That's the criterion for making the call. And in this latest thing that just came out from the NCAA today, that's basically what it says.
I mean, just like, it just goes further to, like, you know, if they're swinging the ball and we're both locked up, and then now it's almost to the point of entry, and I'm releasing. What
are you the defender?
Yeah.
Are you the defender?
No, no.
Okay.
What am I allowed to do to still maintain that position, but not show that I'm stopping them?
Yeah.
Because I mean, my goal is to stop them from getting to.
Well, sure. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to try to coach here, okay? But if the movement of one of the players in the lockup is hindered by the other when the one tries to move, you got to make a call.
And then they were saying if it's the offense, it's an offensive. If it's the defense,
if it's the defense, it's an exclusion. If it's the offense, it's a contra.
Okay.
So bad entry passes. The defense needs to show that they're not fouling. If the pass is bad, there is no need to foul, right? The quality of the pass is discussed nowhere in the rules. All of this stuff that we've been doing for years about, I'm not going to make this call because that was a bad pass. And then sometimes, as you saw in that video, I'm not going to make this really heavy call because it was a bad pass. All that stuff is totally outside the rules as they are written. So the latest direction from the NCAA makes it clear for the college officials, and we should be doing the same thing. Quality of the pass is not part of the rules. It's not your concern, okay? Obviously, there's some point at which the pass is so bad that you're not going to make a call. So there is still that judgment. But if it's gray, if it could have gone either way, or even if it's a little ungray, you should be doing it to the benefit of the offense. Eric.
So 2 questions. First, defender in 2 meters is behind and putting weight on the center. Mm-hmm. You know, the crappy defense just kind of lay them on, kick them out.
If the
like
center ought to show something, you know, center ought to do a little wiggling to get your attention as the official, you know, because sometimes this doesn't look like anything, okay? So if you look like you're struggling in there and they don't show, then yeah, get them out of there.
Okay, and then rebounds. I mean, you know, kind of the old way is, you know, you can really grab somebody on a rebound and it's usually a penalty or an ordinary or a kick out that's just going to be an ordinary foul because it's a rebound. You didn't earn that position. That ball just kind of fell into your lap. Is that?
On penalties, the philosophy has always been that if there's a foul inside the 5, but for which a goal would probably have resulted, it ought to be a penalty. And yeah, maybe it's blind luck that the ball fell in front of the offensive player, but if it fell in front of them while they have inside water, and it's there where they can control it, they've got a real good chance to score. Goalie's probably over here somewhere. You got a half an empty cage, so yeah, if you crunch that player, hold them, pull them back, whatever, that'd be a penalty, because that's a probable goal. The way I do probable goal, you've all heard this before, is, you know, 'cause I'm an engineer, and I think quantitatively. Penalty shots are scored at about a 70% rate. So if you think that 2 out of 3 to 3 out of 4 times in this situation without a foul, this would have been a goal, probably would have been a goal, you got to call a penalty, because that's the kind of advantage that you're restoring when you call the penalty. The offense has to be allowed to swim, and the defense has to swim with the offense. Now, it's not unusual when someone starts a drive on the perimeter, you let the defense have one check to help them rotate over on their hips and then swim. And as long as that check doesn't kill the drive, we've pretty much let that go, and I don't think it's unreasonable to let that go as long as it doesn't kill the drive, okay? So you might give them that, but then after that, you expect to see the defense swimming with the offense. Defensive players can learn how to, instead of making it such that their person they're defending on the perimeter just can't move, instead of trying to keep them from moving, position your body so that they move where you'd rather see them go, instead of just trying to freeze them out of the perimeter. Position your body so that if they go the direction they want to go, they've got to commit a contra. It's a lot smarter than fighting with them on the perimeter. So exclusions away from the ball, and this is getting a lot of emphasis at the collegiate level. On the perimeter, you got to be aware not only of what's going on at the ball, but what's going on 1 or 2 positions over on the umbrella. If somebody tries to move and is about to gain a position of advantage and then is stopped from gaining that position of advantage by being fouled, that should be an exclusion. You gotta let them swim. That's the bottom line in all of this. You gotta swim with them, you gotta let them swim. Lastly, some officials have been really hesitant to call fouls just outside 5 meters, particularly between the posts, because they think they're creating instant offense. The criteria for calling a perimeter foul has to be the same, regardless of whether it's in that area or someplace else on the perimeter. You calling a foul doesn't create offense. The defense committing a foul that gets called is what creates that scoring opportunity. So if a defender makes a decision to foul, or maybe didn't want to foul, but did anyway, in front of the cage, just outside 5 meters, you got to make the call. You got to make the call. The criteria should be the same on the perimeter, regardless of whether it's in a spot that creates a great shooting opportunity. Let me show you a few clips that were used in the school about the perimeter. These are all pretty good. This is an example of good patience. That's all pretty textbook examples. There were a couple of opportunities there to blow the whistle, but it really wasn't needed, okay? Nothing, nothing, nothing. Good reactions. Maybe there, but it wasn't really necessary. Could have been quick there, but it wasn't really necessary. And then here we go, okay? Here's some more patience. He's really trying to show he's not fouling. Okay? On the other hand, you can display too much patience. Finally. Okay. There's really nothing new in any of that, is there? I don't think there's anything new in any of that. Play during the transition. In most cases, the center and the former center defender really ought to be the last pair down the pool. In most cases, not always, but in most cases, they really ought to be. And all this stuff that you see that goes on at that position during the breakout, as hockey players call it, or during the transition, is all extracurricular physicality that really looks ugly to the game. Holding, grabbing, wrestling, kicking off, you got to call it, including doubles if necessary. Okay? Because often you can't tell who started it. You just can't tell. You call a few of those and they'll knock it off. Preferably, you'd like to make the call before the goalie releases the ball so that the ball doesn't have to come back, but safety is more important than advantage. And if they're going at it in a way that you think compromises player safety, you gotta step in and stop it, okay? Safety trumps advantage, always. Now, during the counterattack, something has come up, I know, in some of the tournament games up here. The issue of stunting has come up. Okay, if I'm countering down the pool and I've got body and a half lead on my defender, and if I, for some reason I don't understand, would choose to stop, to give up that nice advantage, give up the opportunity to have my teammates pass me the ball and take my shot, if I should stop and wait for my defender to get up on my back, and then start working to release again, hoping to get the official to call an exclusion, so that I can have a 6-on-5 instead of my 1 on the goalie. Should I choose to do that? How are you to treat this so-called stunting, this trying to break loose and trying to get the foul? Is it simulation? Is it not simulation? Is it an automatic turnover for simulation? We're going to have a slide on simulation in just a little bit. I'll come back to that subject in the context of that slide. But since this is the slide on transition and counter, I just wanted to lay it out there for you now, and we'll come back to it, okay? Yep, this is it. What I want you guys to do is watch this pair here. This feeds right into your question. I got no sound here, but that's okay. And finally, it's called. Guy could have been kicked out 2 or 3 times before he finally was, but Yeah. And it wasn't until I saw this in a higher resolution, let's just play this at half speed. Watch what the white player does. This will explain why the blue player gestured in frustration to the official after he had been excluded. Just watch this. Now you can see it. Reaches out, grabs him around the neck, pulls him over in a cross-chest carry on top of him, and then goes to the other direction. Okay? And yeah, he's pulled back there. He's being sunk when the guy's swimming backstroke while sitting on his shoulders. And there finally had to be called. Okay, now, keep in mind, ball's here, the front court referee's probably watching the ball at that instant, and this is over by the time he looks back to see what happened here. So that's a tough call to pick up. Okay, so that's enough of that. So not only on the transition out of the center and former center defender position, but on the transition on top too, sometimes these things happen. It's not as prevalent as it is at the center position. And again, we'll come back to the subject of stunting in just a little bit. In fact, we'll do it now, simulation. Simulation is very specifically defined in the rules. I haven't memorized the exact words, but in essence, it's an attempt to convince the official to call a foul where there is none. It can only occur when there is no foul. Often offensive players, in their efforts to simulate, wind up committing contras. And if the defense is doing a good job at showing that they're not fouling, it makes it a lot easier to see that contra when it happens. It really isn't something that's expected would be called very often. You have to be absolutely sure that there is no foul before you call simulation. And the signal for simulation, believe it or not, is this. Wave your hand in front of your face like this. Okay? It differs from embellishment, which occurs when there actually is a foul. The rules don't say anything about embellishment. And I'll tell you guys that in the National Evaluator Group, as the points of emphasis were being drafted and sent back and forth to the rules subcommittee people, we really struggled with talking about what should we say about embellishment. What should we say about it, you know? How do we draw the line between embellishment and simulation? Should there be a penalty for embellishment? And finally, somebody in the group realized that the word embellishment, or enhancement if you prefer, those words, neither one appear in the rule book anywhere. So since the rules are silent on it, we decided that the points of emphasis should also be silent on it. So in that situation, when you have someone who waits for a defender to get on their back and then tries to convince you to call a kick out, you've got to ask yourself, is there a foul here, first of all? Maybe there is. Maybe the defender, realizing what position they were in, didn't get their hands up and kept trying to swim up their back. If so, that stunting is not simulation. So I understand somebody was claiming that stunting is an automatic contra. It's an automatic simulation call. Somebody was saying that around here this weekend. That is not true. You have to decide whether that's a no foul situation and therefore should be called a contra, or even an offensive foul if they do this back into the player behind them, okay? And make the call accordingly. But if you feel the foul is there and you feel that what you're seeing is embellishment, now you have to decide whether you're going to call a foul at all under the precepts of the advantage rule, okay? Stunting is not an automatic anything. And similarly, on the perimeter, you see perimeter offensive players, instead of getting up on their legs and making the pass, trying to draw the foul. They're doing CPR with their head, or they're doing the swing and leave the ball there. Those are contras. Just call them. Simulation, there has to be no foul. Embellishment, the rules say nothing about it. But if you catch the foul when it happens and call it, if appropriate, you're less likely to see embellishment. So what's not changing as a result of all of this? Number one, this is still a contact sport. Number two, it's still a physical sport, but we're going to try to tone it down. Officials are not expected to call everything they see. Player safety trumps advantage. Advantage trumps most other situations. And under advantage, you should not be calling everything you see, right? And lastly, under the advantage rule, the officials are supposed to referee, as always, in the favor of the offensive team. Any questions? That's the last slide. That is 7 to 8 hours of instruction condensed into however long this was. I wanted to mention one other situation that I saw on Friday. Got a driver coming up the middle, wide open, defenders a body plus behind, and another offensive player attempted to drive and got grabbed, and the official called the exclusion on that player who was attempting to drive, having lost track of the fact that the bigger advantage was on the driver coming up the middle wide open, and that's where the ball was going to go next anyway. So don't get so locked in on this idea of making these kinds of calls that you forget about advantage. Advantage still trumps most situations like that. It's different from what we've been doing, and when it's done right, and I think it was largely done right in that scrimmage the other night, it's a lot of fun to watch. It's still physical. There's still a lot of stuff going on in there, but it isn't World Wrestling Entertainment anymore. Any other questions?
Thank you so much.
I hope this was helpful.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay.
Thanks, Dave.
You're welcome.